Alright, so here's our render at this point. And I'm going to show you how to set this up. It's just taking a little variation on what we had just done. There's two things we got to do. Under filtering, we had set up the motion blur, and the initial passes were set to 1. Well, I upped it to about 6, and you can even go up to 8, 12, whatever. You can, try just a few variations there. And I think I could bring the blur down about 45%, just a little bit less. The other thing I need to do is in the camera properties, change my anti-aliasing to 9, roughly 9. I mean, you can go higher or lower depending on your scene. We'll hit S to save the scene, and I'll press F9 again. And now you can see that my anti-aliasing is up to 9. I'm still using a reconstruction filter of Classic, which is one that's always worked for me. We're still doing a photoreal motion blur, but our motion blur amount is 0.45 is how it calculates out. And you can see here then, as we render this, the dice are still on the ground. I'm going to show you how to fix that. But rather than that first really grainy, noisy picture we had, you're going to see it's going to be a lot cleaner. Now, I've also put on the shadows, which you had seen in the previous video. What we have to do now is actually put a little bit of texture on everything. We could put a little bit of a bump map on the ground here, create a little bit of a fuzz on a very tight bump map. Not absolutely necessary. I'm just going to put a little bit of noise on there across, just so it's not so clean. And then we're going to map wood onto the other areas. And we'll just let this calculate out. Still not bad, about a minute a frame. A little over a minute. There's a lot of geometry in there for it to calculate. But now you can see how much cleaner that motion blur is, just by changing those two things. Okay, and the photoreal motion blur 9.6 is working very, very nicely for us. Okay, so what will really be cool is when these get up in the air and we see them blurring. So why aren't they in the air right now, even though they are here in our scene? The reason is, if you remember, back in the beginning when we started setting up this animation, we changed our display subpatch to 0. And that's what we started working with. So we had very low poly dice rolling down the table. We can close this. Okay, that works great for the calculation, but the problem is we've got these chunky little hexagons here, octagons. When we render, it's a high quality, but when we calculate it, it's not. And basically, the dynamic engine calculated the low res when you really need to calculate the high res. So we're going to do this about 2. We actually probably don't even need 3. And you can even see that as I change that on the die, you can see them actually jump back into a different position. Okay, because the dynamics were not calculated for those higher res objects. And we could probably get away with 2. Okay, so I'm going to save the scene one more time. Let's open the objects back up. Go to dynamics, and I'm going to calculate one more time. And we might need to go a little bit higher on these. Let me see. No, actually, it's pretty good. Okay, so this is going to take a little bit longer because now we're calculating that much more geometry. So I'm going to let this finish, and then we will do one last video, and I'll put the textures on the wood, and we'll throw some a little more creative lighting on there, and we'll be done with this project.